Welcome to Invisibly Unwell. I'm your host, Paige Lavelle. I've spent the past 2 decades climbing the corporate ladder. I've worked hard to get where I am professionally, but there's a side of me that few are aware of. I am also an autoimmune warrior, an eating disorder survivor, an author, and now a podcast host. My goal here is to educate and empower high-achieving women navigating autoimmune conditions and other chronic illnesses, who at the same time are also dealing with challenges that all high-achieving women face, like disordered eating, perfectionism, and people-pleasing. Invisibly Unwell is what I wish I had at the start of my journey. You are not alone. I hope my story and the stories and expertise of my guests will provide you with knowledge and ideas and empower you to share your own story and advocate for the life you've worked so hard to build. Quick disclaimer, this podcast is meant for general information purposes only and should not be taken as a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Today's guest is Danika Brysha, a 3-time wellness entrepreneur, plus-size fashion model, and a new mother. While leading her 3 companies, Self-Care Society, Model Meals, and Danika Brysha Inc., and modeling for brands like Bare Minerals, Old Navy, and Land's End, she guides others to find the wellness routines that are the foundation for the life they dream of. Danika has worked with thousands of people, myself included, to spread wellness and cultivate self-care routines and systems that stick. She's extremely passionate about empowering others to come back home to themselves. Through her journey of recovery from disordered eating, food addiction, body issues, excessive alcohol and drug use, deep debt, and an overall lack of confidence and purpose, Danika uses her own experience to help others transform and thrive. She is so open, so vulnerable. I know that her story will resonate with listeners, and I'm so honored that she's taken the time to be here today. Well, welcome, Danika. I am so happy to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me, Paige.
Yeah. So obviously I did an intro bio, but if you could just give kind of a high level overview to anyone listening about who you are, what you're doing today, and your story, what got you to this point.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like, I feel like such a different person today than, I don't know, a year or 2 ago. Like it's so, and I think it's so aligned with the message of your podcast and your brand, which is just this idea of like releasing perfectionism and I don't know, that hustle culture and all that. So it's funny. I feel like when I used to talk about what I did, it was like naming all the businesses I was running and all that. And, that's valid. I'm not going to celebrate that, but man, life is really different now. So, I have worked in the wellness space for some time. I started a business called Model Meals. It was a meal delivery company. I started that in 2014 and grew it pretty organically until we were acquired by a public company in 2020. So I stayed on until August of last year and exited that company. Prior to that, I was a plus size model, and I've been doing that for, I kind of did that simultaneously while growing my business. So I worked in, for, brands like Old Navy and Target, like all these big names. I lived in New York City and did all that. And, prior to that, I'm kind of working backwards here. Prior to that, I really struggled with food and body. I spent most of my life dieting and had bulimia and all of that. Definitely went into the sort of like clean eating health space, which served me in a lot of ways. And now, kind of fast forwarding, I am a new mom. I have a 1.5-year-old. And I'm growing my company, Self-Care Society, which is really meant to help people cultivate consistent mental fitness. So all those sort of, it's like live journaling classes, essentially. So journaling, gratitude, affirmations, mindset. I love helping people achieve their goals and get clear on that. So I'm really focused on that right now. And really just on slowing down. For so long, it was all the multi-hyphenates and doing all the things and I feel like the girl boss hustle era. And now what I really value is ease and time in my garden and time with my daughter and just, like paying attention to my nervous system and what feels good. So I'm proud to say that while it feels unnatural to me, like I feel like I'm doing so much less, I'll put it in quotes, it feels good physically. It's just different. So that's where I am today. And we live in Las Vegas, Nevada.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. A lot of what you just said resonated. I feel like anytime someone would ask me to introduce myself, I was very resume forward, gave them all the letters that I have after my name, went from there. And when people would stop me to say, like, well, what are you passionate about or what do you enjoy? I would just get kind of stuck in my words because I was like, wait, that's not computing. That doesn't go with my spiel that I give about all of my accomplishments and the hustle mentality. So one thing I would love to hear a little more about. So you said your focus now is self-care society and focusing on your nervous system. Something I've shared a lot in my own story is that it's really easy to take that perfectionism, girl boss hustle mentality, not to say it's ill-intended from everyone, but it can get a bit obsessive. Taking that can be very, very simple and easy to take that focus on your career and shift it to how to be the perfect wellness person, how to be the perfect self-care person, how to find the right yoga practice, how to eat the right foods. And it's just very easy to get consumed by doing things, quote unquote, perfectly. I'm curious if you would be willing to expand a little on if you fell into that trap like I did. It was a hamster wheel for a long time, and how you came to develop what you consider true self-care, not hashtag self-care that takes over Instagram.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I think like anything, it's never like a simple solution. Everything like that for me has taken time. Like finding the grace in any of these things is usually like I almost have to go hardcore first, and then things even out. And I'd like to believe that moving forward, I don't have to, and that I can just come from this like gentle, graceful place with myself in all things. And I do feel like I'm really getting there. But so much has, whether it was eating clean or, my morning routine, it was like, started at like 6 a.m. and then it turned into 5 a.m. and then it turned into 4 a.m. because I had all these things, but then I had a daughter and it totally shook up everything in a way beyond, like they tell you it's going to, but like way beyond, because I used to have so much time for myself and I love to spend time on myself. I love to read and I love personal development and I love wellness and all of that. And then becoming someone's mother and keeping them alive and breastfeeding and all that, it just totally shifted things for me. And I was just so burnt out for so long because when my daughter was born, I was basically running 4 companies at the time because I was running Model Meals and I was also the CMO of the public company that acquired us while I was the CEO of Model Meals. So I was doing both, running Danika Brysha Inc. And I have a team there who helps with, my kind of personal brand, and running Self-Care Society, which we launched in 2020. So I was doing all of that with a newborn, and I just was so burnt out. And so, nowadays I'm so proud because I feel like while it's natural to want to push myself. I'm an achiever. Like I love that. I love dreaming something and doing it. I will say, I feel like I have a lot more gentleness today in terms of what gets done and how it gets done. And because I think that I've shifted to see that as self-care, and I think that for me, self-care is now not so much about getting done all of the exercises and the things. It's tuning into what I need. It's like intuitive action. And that's really important to me. And these days it's just, things are slower in a lot of ways. And that's, and it feels healthier, even though it feels very counterintuitive to what I'm used to.
Yeah, that makes complete sense to me. And I really appreciate you expanding on that. So one thing I would love to circle back to, and it definitely relates to things you just shared. So I also struggled with bulimia for a very long time. And I really appreciate you being forthcoming about that, because I feel, at least in my experience, when I've talked about it and how much of a struggle it was for me to open up about that, there's a lot of shame around that eating disorder specifically, and around binge eating disorder. You hear about orthorexia, you hear about anorexia, and I'm not making light of them. I have friends who have struggled with both, and they are just as valid and concerning of an eating disorder. It's almost a little bit of this. I have friends who were struggling with anorexia in the moment. It was almost a badge of honor. Like, I have this self-discipline, I have this control. And obviously not the case. And obviously they sought help and they're doing much better. But with bulimia, it felt like this whole extra level of shame, just because of the purging aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
And B, because it felt like I didn't have that control. I was losing control and seeking to fill that with food. And the just compulsion of anyone, I won't do a TED talk on it right now, but there's a lot of neurotransmitters and lots of hormones and things involved that you get that risk reward response when you go through a binge purge cycle. So not risk reward, but you just get the immediate relief. And then unfortunately you crave the next one. So it's very similar to an addiction cycle, if not almost exactly the same. So I would love if you would be open to sharing kind of how that started for you. I know I always had body image issues. I was always fairly thin and athletic growing up. Doesn't mean you don't have body image issues. I was very critical of myself. And my disorder developed when I got to college and had my first taste of true, quote unquote, freedom. And I was always type A on student council, on the dance team, making sure I was checking all the gold stars on the chart. And suddenly I had this freedom. I wasn't under someone's thumb. But I had spent my whole life up to that point. Granted, I'm adolescent brain at this point, I'm 18, but I had spent all of my years trying to fit into a box and trying to get the acceptance and approval of others. And then suddenly when I had this little bit of freedom, like the box was no longer shut, where you think that would be the time to shine, I cratered. And that was the way that I really coped. And so I feel like there's such a misunderstanding that it's entirely about weight and entirely about being thin, where there really is a lot more going on there. And I know that my perfectionism and my people pleasing played into it big time. So I was curious if you could share a little more about how that developed, when that developed, and what your experience was with that.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's an important point that you make, because I think so much of disordered eating can come from so many different places. And, interestingly enough, I will say that a lot of mine did come from a lack of self-worth. And a lot of that was related to my body and my size. Because I was always a bigger girl. I was always the biggest of my friends. I couldn't shop at Abercrombie Kids or anywhere my friend limited to. And I think around high school, and my mom was dieting all the time. I started going to Weight Watchers when I was 14. So weight loss was just like part of what I knew. And it was really, for me, a lot of it was about my body, because what I saw in the media and around me was that if I lost weight, if I was skinny, I had more value. And so I followed that, and I tried diet after diet. And what sparked the bulimia for me was I did Atkins when I was like a junior in high school. And I ended up losing like 40 pounds. It was like my most significant weight loss. And I, unfortunately, was validated that I was right, that when I was thinner, I did get more attention, more opportunities. People were nicer to me. People wanted to date me. And so it was like, oh, okay, I was right. Like, I'm better when I'm thin. And so eventually, like on any diet, like the weight starts coming back. And that's when I really felt like, well, I don't want to give up on this new life where I feel so good, and people are attracted to me. And so that's when I started throwing up. And I was throwing up like 7-8 times a day. And I think what you said is so important of like, yeah, it's like I felt like I would have loved to be anorexic. And that sounds so bad to say, but like, yeah, I didn't feel like.
I hate saying it. I almost like recoil when I say it, but I definitely very clearly had that thought that I was like, well, I can't, I just control it that way.
Right. And then my bulimia was also very much binge induced. So once I started throwing up, then I was binging, and I was, there were times. I remember one bad binge I had, I added it up and it was 10,000 calories in like 20 minutes. And people are like, how do you even do that? I'm like, you go numb. It's a drug, and my partner's in recovery from addiction, and, like it's very much an addiction. So, it took me some time. I got into different drugs, and then I got into alcohol, and so much of that, like some of the things I did when I would, like how I would drink, it was all about wanting to be seen, because I never felt seen and I never felt enough who I was naturally. And so I have a lot of things I did that I regretted, just to simply like be the class. I was always the class clown and the homecoming queen, the class president, like it's like just achieving and people pleasing and doing whatever I thought I needed to do, or whoever I thought I needed to be for people to like me. And I think some of that, while I started healing quite a bit in my 20s, some of that I think was brought into the achievement culture of running all these businesses and like being a successful hashtag girl boss, like, like whatever. And some of that was brought there. So I think, it's been a journey, and I can honestly say, I feel such at peace, so like at peace these days. And I really like, I did Whole30, and again, Whole30 gifted me so much. Like I cannot talk back. Like it educated me, it taught me like what to look for. And I think it was a really foundational, beautiful thing. Granted, I didn't always use it perfectly how it's meant to, and not about a diet, whatever. I for sure used it for weight loss at times, but it also really educated me into the food freedom I have today, which is, I read not too long ago, Christy Harrison's anti-diet, and, and I just let go. Like, my energy is so much more valuable in other places, and I let go. And there's just a sense of like peace and ease that comes with that. So I think I just went on a whole long-winded rant beyond the question you answered me. But anyway,
no,
you asked me.
That's ideal. I'd rather this feel like a real conversation that someone can relate to than an interview. So that's perfect. I can relate as far as finding certain diets and practices and methodologies. A big part of my health story is autoimmunity. Mm-hmm. And so I was diagnosed when I was 12 with my first autoimmune disease. I've since been diagnosed with 2 others. I thankfully am able to function and live a very normal life. Mm-hmm. But part of the reason I started the podcast and writing a book was so that other people that deal with those things in the shadows, because it's very easy to pass.
Yeah.
As I'm fine, I'm not sick.
Yeah.
And as you said, the validation you get from some of these disordered behaviors and these issues just bolsters your resolve to hide it. Mm-hmm. So I know when I was bulimic, I was already fairly small. Now it's crazy to put myself into that 18-year-old brain. I'm 37.
Yeah.
And I look at pictures, and back then I was like, oh, I need to lose 5 pounds. And now I'm like, girl, like, you're so thin, like you're crazy. But I mean, it was a very different time too. We didn't have body positive people on the covers of magazines. We didn't have Lizzo, who just makes me feel so good about myself if I listen to her music and go for a walk. I had, not knocking them, they were a product of the time, I had Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera. And my mission was to have my hip bones protruding over my pants. Like that was something I wanted to have. And that was an ideal that was constantly pitched to me. So at that time, I would get validation because when I became bulimic, I immediately lost, 10 or 15 pounds in a month because I'm completely dehydrated. I'm not, I'm malnourished. And I was in college, and it was during finals when it first happened. So the stress just kept triggering it over and over and over again. But what I was going to say, back to my original point around Whole30 for you, which I've tried Whole30 before, and these other methods that are out there, they're highly educational and they're very beneficial. What concerns me for people that can relate to the perfectionism and the black and white thinking, you do have to kind of catch yourself when you're trying to execute perfectly. Yeah. One thing I wish was shared more widely, just social media, online, everywhere, is you can take pieces and things that resonate from a certain practice or a certain thought, school of belief, if you will, or diet. You don't have to become a zealot. You don't have to become, the best Whole30er in the world in order to gain something out of it. Yeah. And I think that's in part just a cultural thing. It's America. For example, I love watching, I'm not suggesting that everything's better in the UK, but I love watching the Great British Baking Show and how sweet they are to each other. And they go and they help each other when someone's having a problem. I watch our cooking shows here, and it's just like, oh, like they just revel in someone's failure because it means that you're better. Yeah. So I do think there's a bit of a cultural issue there of just, I'm going to be the best. Second place might as well be last. So that, I think that plays into it, but especially as a female, when you're not just by our parents or our authority figures, but at a societal level, you're taught to be palpable, to be liked, to be pleasant, to be attractive, to be approachable. And it really, I think, sets us on this path from a young age to disconnect with like who we truly are. And one of the things you shared that really makes me strive to work more in that space is you were saying just kind of going inward, listening, connecting to yourself. I think that's something that's, we should all aspire to. It's something that's hard when you've lived your life so long on this hustle track. So I would really love to hear more about what helped you get there, and
Yeah.
what, even if it's like a practice or just a mindset you have that really helps you dial in and connect with yourself, when for so long I feel like we've been trained to not have that innate connection.
Yeah. I mean, and this is the reason I started Self Care Society, is because what I realized, and I remember, I mean, I've had so many aha moments, but what I realized was that my entire life, I have been under the impression that I can't trust myself. And so diet culture teaches us that, right? It says, oh, well, clearly you've gained weight or XYZ. And so you can't be trusted with food. Someone knows better than you. Whoever has this diet or whatever, someone knows better, but like you can't be trusted. And then I looked at how that played out in so many areas of my life. And I was just like, wow, if we like for me, the ultimate goal is to help people come home to themselves and rebuild self-trust and go inward for answers instead of outwards. And I say this all the time. I say, seek inspiration outside by all means. Like that's what's so beautiful about our collective and sharing and all of that. But we have to seek answers within. So seek inspiration outside, seek answers within. And oftentimes what I found in my work is that people have their answers. They just don't create the space to listen. And so when I started Self Care Society, that was really the purpose, right? For me, writing, for many people, writing is a really great tool to kind of come back to yourself and to go inward and check in and say like, hey, what's going on with you? And so I wanted to create a space where that could happen consistently, where we could go inward, where we could carve out the space for ourselves, and trusting. Like one thing that's been really clear to me lately is just I think for so long, so many of us search for the answer to a problem we're having that is like the end all be all answer. Like this is the life answer. Until I find like the answer that works all the time, I'm going to keep searching and tiring myself out, instead of looking at life as seasons and realizing that what works for you right now might not work for you next year, right? Or vice versa. And so for me, the gray area is really challenging for people. And I get it. It is. It's harder than living in black and white. Like Whole30 is actually, I think, easy in a lot of ways, in the sense that I'm not saying it's easy. It's a challenge, but like it's easier than the part of the Whole30, the reintroduction and the food freedom, because there's not such structure. It's not so black and white. And what it does is it says, okay, you did this thing and I held you and you had all your rules, so you didn't have to really be responsible for anything. And here is an opportunity now that you get to trust yourself. And we're like, no. I learned when I was little, like, I can't trust myself. I can't be
like, if you put the cookies in front of me, I'm obviously going to eat the entire bowl of cookies. Right. Like that kind of mentality. Yeah.
That. And there's a healing that takes place with that belief, but it doesn't happen overnight. And so for using food as an example, just because I think so many of us can relate, it's like many people, when they're like, okay, I'm done dieting, right? And thankfully the anti-diet conversation is prominent right now. I think it's important. But when they go into that, then it's like a free for all. And once they do that for enough time, a month, 2 months, 6 months, they're like, this isn't working. Like, I tried it, but I can't trust myself. And what happens is like you've seen that like cartoon of the guy and he's digging for gold. And it's like, he's been digging for all this time and the gold is like right there, but he wants to turn around because, it's like that, right? It's just so gradual. And I think that that's what's hard. Sometimes I feel a little bit stumped in terms of talking about my own healing and like where I am now. Like what I can tell you is life is really, it's hard as a parent. It's like a different chapter, right? But life is so, from a nervous system and a gentleness and a self-grace, life is so different. Like the ease and the self-compassion, and there's no black and white answer. And I think that that's what a lot of people try to look for, instead of looking for the answer that works right now. And I think making any changes from a place of self-love is what has something stick around, right? And the first time I did Whole30, I really did do it from an energy of self-love. I remember thinking like, it was a big change in my life. It was 2014. I moved from LA to New York. I had signed with a modeling agency there. I was living on my own for the first time. I got sober, and I was like, what? I deserve and dream. I have these dreams and I deserve to live this life I dream of, and I'm not. And so I need to change some things. And so I really did come from this place of self-love. And I think that's why so many of these things actually stuck for me, was because when I took action on these things, it was because I deserved to feel good. And it came from a positive motivation instead of punishing myself. So anyway, yeah, I think that for now it's looking at the season of life and saying what works right now. I love Kate Northrup talks a lot about the nervous system. I'm so not an expert about it, but it's something that's really intriguing to me. I'm seeing a lot of people I really respect talking about the role of the nervous system. And when I hear that, I'm not a sciencey gal. I don't know biology, whatever, but in the simplest form, to me, that means checking in and saying how do I feel right now? And so many of us spent so much of our life numb. We could talk for hours about that, right? I had to go to therapy to relearn how to feel my feelings. I was so disconnected.
Oh, I still go to therapy because you get so far and it just takes something that triggers one thing you haven't worked through to be like, oh, I've come really far, but I still have some stuff I can do.
For sure. And then there's the balance of there's this beautiful balance now that I'm aware of the always working on myself versus permission to just be, and so
existing is uncomfortable. I feel for perfectionists.
For sure. So anyway, I get coming back kind of to what the question was, I hope that I can show up and share my journey and tools and self-care society in a way that helps people cultivate more self-trust and self-love for themselves, because I feel like that is the answer to all of the problems. At the end of the day, it's if you find self-trust and you find self-compassion, and you go inward and you hold space for yourself, the rest takes care of itself. It's easier. It's less, it requires a lot less force and maneuvering to find ease, Yeah,
absolutely. And one thing that came up for me, listening to your story and how open you are about it, I know for myself, something that has come easier, that has paved the way, so to speak, to self-compassion, because I am the hardest on myself. My partner continuously tells me, he's like, you're so kind to everyone and you're so mean to yourself. And it's hard sometimes to watch and to listen to. So one thing that's helped me make some strides there, and it's an area I continue to work on, is having compassion and grace for others and kind of catching yourself in that moment of I can extend this to myself. I am just as human as these other people. And I think a big part in my growth mentally and emotionally was letting go of a lot of judgments that I realized existed because they made me feel safe. It wasn't because I thought less of people. It's well, if I judge others, then I will feel like I'm, above. And it took realizing that is just you trying to put up these walls. That is not you being better in any way. That is just a defense mechanism. So something you had mentioned and something I have experience with family and friends. One of the greatest gifts that came from having the eating disorder that I had for many years was a sense of compassion for people who struggle with addiction and coping mechanisms that society is exponentially harsher about. And so you hear eating disorder, you think, which is why I kept it to myself for a long time, oh, I have a lot of privilege, white, middle class, raised in the US, have a great education. I'm very aware of the privilege. And I didn't want to be painted as, oh, that poor little spoiled girl, because that's unfortunately a lot of what you see published and written about with regard to eating disorders. When I started to open up about it and when I started to do my own research and do a lot of therapy around it, it really opened my eyes to the fact that I was definitely judgmental about people that struggled with addiction when the exact same chemical process was going on with me. But I was getting commented on my hip bones protruding above my jeans, and friends I had who were struggling with substance abuse were getting judged and getting talked about. And it's something that it definitely opened my eyes and made me a significantly more compassionate person, and someone that I'm very willing in conversations to speak about that. When you hear people say things that are, I mean, I can't think of a better term, uneducated, frankly, or they don't have experience there. So I'm curious if your experience being exposed to that as well, do you feel like that helped you gain a lot of compassion, and did that help you extend some of that to yourself?
For sure. Now, I think I mentioned my partners in recovery as well. And I think that it was one of the things that brought us together. And to be honest, like I think some of the people who do go through addiction, disorder, like all these things it forces you to do some self-work that I think makes some of the most incredible people, because they're willing to be vulnerable and honest, and you kind of have to like reset the way that you operate. And so for sure, I've been, I think that, I remember my partner, I would talk about how my relationship with food in terms of addiction as well. And I think he didn't really understand. He was like, because he was doing opiates, like hardcore stuff. And he was like, I didn't really understand it until I walked in on you in a bit. Like he came to my house, and this was like early in our relationship, maybe like 6 years ago. And he came in, he saw me kind of with like food around me, and I was binge eating, and I had stopped throwing up for a long time, but I still struggle with binge eating for quite some time. And he was like, oh, I get it. Like, it was like the look on your face of like, I've been caught in this sort of like shame circumstance in my, and I don't want anyone to take it away from me. And so I think that we really understood each other in that way. And then you realize, I don't know, like I step back and I'm like, I don't want to say everyone has an addiction, but I think that people don't realize how much they use certain things to check out and to not be with themselves. And a lot of that is our phones these days. Like, I'm really interested to see what sort of resources and conversations come out over the next decade, just helping people with addiction issues around technology and stimulation and information processing. And, so regarding compassion for myself, yes, for sure. I think I still have a lot of room to grow here. My partner's the same way. He was like, you're so hard on yourself, and sometimes I don't actually even, most of the time I don't realize it, it's just so natural. And so while I feel like I've made a lot of progress, I also feel like there's a lot of progress to be made still, of just being more gentle, with myself and where I am, and just knowing, like, coming back to like, it's just a season, especially with motherhood. It's been like a whole, it's just a whole different way of being. And so that's like, it's a season, right? It's a season right now with a young child. It's just, it's a season of slowing down. Maybe you're speeding up. Maybe this will be speeding up and it'll be slowing down next. Who knows, right? Like,
yeah,
like the contrast. But anyway, I think that there's always, I'm always working on that self-compassion muscle, but I have certainly come a long way.
No, and I really love the concept of seasons. I'm going to try to absorb that and take that in, because I know something I struggle with, and I've talked to many people who've struggled with something similar, is when you do start to go inward, when you do start to get in touch with yourself and decide, like, maybe I'm not living the life that I truly desire and the life that I feel I deserve, for a long laundry list variety of reasons why you've gotten to that point. But at the same time, when you've been very hustle focused, very accomplishment focused, you tend to crush goals, and you tend to rack up these accomplishments that it feels almost like a self-betrayal to put those aside and to pursue something different. So I'm writing a book right now, but I historically, it's changed very recently, but have worked in fintech for a decade. So it's something that, do I feel super fulfilled by it? No. Did I work super hard to get to where I am professionally? Yes. And academically. So it's something that I still grapple with, because it's hard when you look at these gold stars you've collected and you consider stepping away from that to pursue something that's very outside of your comfort zone, because you have this, like, not to be an econ nerd, but like sunk cost fallacy. You're like, I put all this time and energy into this. Like, I need to make this work. Where it's like, you have to take that perspective of, yeah, I did put a lot of time and energy into something that may not have aligned. It doesn't mean I got nothing out of it. just because I'm not doing the stereotypical end result, or I'm not pursuing the stereotypical end result of that. So when you started Model Meals and you were modeling and shifted away from modeling, did you, whether it was shifting away from the modeling career or shifting away and selling model meals, was that a struggle at all, as someone who was very hustle focused and that was kind of your baby from a business perspective?
For sure. So this all happened like in a really, I had a lot of change in a short period of time. When I left my company, so I had my daughter in late January of 2022. And then in August of 2022, I left my company, working in the company. And then in November, they shut it down. And then also in November, I got a call from my modeling agents and they dropped me. I hadn't been working for a few years. I was pregnant. It was COVID and all that. And they dropped me. And I moved, it just a lot changed for me. And what was interesting is working with my coach at the time, my main goals were to slow down. I was so burnt out. I was doing so many things on top of running these companies. I'm renting my house on Airbnb and renting out the RV and renting out both our cars. And it's always a hustle. It was always this multi-revenue stream, whatever, which I'm not mad at that, but I also think that there's a big dialogue around passive income streams and all that. And it's just kind of bullshit. It's not nothing's truly passive. I shouldn't say nothing, but many things are not actually passive. And
they're at a minimum, they're not passive at the outset.
Right. Exactly. So for me, all of this change was really, I was at a place in my life where I saw it as an opportunity. It doesn't mean that I brush it under the rug and I don't feel the pain or shame of being dropped by my agency or, my company not, closing or whatever. It doesn't mean that I do that, but all of it supported what I wanted, which was ease and simplification. I have it on my whiteboard here. It says simple, spacious, and secure. That's how I want to feel. I want to feel things to feel simple. I want things to feel spacious, and I want to feel secure. And next to it, I have plenty of time. And that's a big one for me because for so long, there was never enough time. And so I think what happens is that we have to redefine what success is and redefine it not based on how the world has said, what the world has said or our culture has said success is, but redefine it by how we want to feel and our nervous system. And, I'm really big in helping people identify how they want to feel because everything we desire is based on how we think we're going to feel when we get to that point. And so why not start with the feeling and say, okay, well, I want to have this successful company and making six figures. Well, why? And the reason why would be, well, I want to feel secure and I want to feel accomplished and I want to feel successful and I want to feel proud. And it's okay, well, there's all these different ways that you can go about feeling those successful and proud and accomplished. And this is one of them, but there's also so many other things. And so I think coming back to our feelings as goals, and this is a big part of my end of year, year program I do is really helping people identify how do you want to feel and how can we support you getting there both with the big dreams and with the small micro habits of your day to day. What's something little that makes you feel accomplished each day? And so for me, it was just leaning into that and what success looked like. And success, I changed my definition of success. And it just wasn't about the blue check and the and the hustle and the sold my company and XYZ. It was about how much freedom do I have? What does my day look like on a day I don't feel like working? Do I get to, right? How much time do I get to spend with my daughter? And I just reevaluated that. And so it doesn't mean it was easy because I will say slowing down for now was a huge cut in income. And I'm not going to lie about that. I don't believe it has to be. I don't believe that hustle and money are connected. They can be, but I don't believe it has to be. And I believe actually that true success, financial or however you want to identify it, comes from ease and joy. But I think that that's a process that I'm on, at least, to get to that point and really witness it. But yeah, redefining goals and redefining success as what really feels good, creating a life that feels good on the inside. That's like my motto for Self-Care Society. I want to help people create a life that feels good on the inside, because when they feel good, you know what they do is they go out and do good. And that's how we change the world.
Yeah, I love that. Again, with the few things that you're saying, I'm like, come on, let this absorb, because I still very much struggle with the hustle mentality. And like I said, I worked really hard to get to where I am at this point professionally. And that includes my income and investment opportunities there. And so letting go of that, feather in your cap of like, I'm financially successful, and trying to pause and think like what actually feels good. Is something that it's a hurdle. Like it's not an easy flip the switch and I'm just going to focus on how I feel. So I really appreciate that you're putting Self-Care Society out there, knowing that it's something people aspire to for their own sanity and emotional and mental health. And that's something that I think there's such a need. I can just say, as someone who's gone down the very, very deep, long rabbit hole of self-care and the hashtag wellness space. I say hashtag because there are really great things out there in the wellness space, but there's a lot of trends too. That you sometimes end up just running yourself ragged, trying to meditate, be mindful, take all the supplements, all the green juices. And meanwhile, you're like, I have these toxic friendships and I haven't worked on my relationship with my mom that can be a strain. And I have a job that is not fulfilling. And you're like, but if I just go to yoga and I drink my green juice, everything's going to be fine. So it's just nice to hear a candid story about like, you really do have to kind of pause and reevaluate. And I agree. I don't think that that abundance is directly tied to like the amount of hours you put in. But that's been beaten into our brain for so long that it's not an easy thing to disconnect from. So I still struggle with well, if I don't have a job where I work 50 plus hours a week, how can I possibly make six figures? Like that just doesn't make any sense. Yeah. So is there any steps you took or any just, I guess, insights you have on how you kind of were able to start detaching from that, trading your time and sweat and tears for money, and that's the only way to connect them?
Yeah, I wanted to share, for anyone who hasn't read Kate Northrop's book, Do Less, it's really an incredible resource. And she tells the story. They had a year where I think her husband was sick, like all this stuff happened, and they had two kids, and all this stuff happened where they just weren't able to put the hours into the company that they typically did. And at the end of the year, their revenue was like exponentially higher. And she just really, I think she does a really great job at helping us understand that doesn't have to be connected, and that actually, like the more we honor and take care for ourselves, the more creative we are, the more. I always say that self-care doesn't take time, it makes time. And what I mean by that is that we know, like, if we get enough sleep, we take the extra hour of sleep, or we, schedule some alone time for ourselves, or we get out in nature, when we sit down at our desk to do our work or whatever we traditionally are calling work, like, we're that much more productive, we're that much more clear, we're that much more insightful. And for me, I know I can get done in an hour what might take me 3 or 4 hours when I'm feeling foggy and tired and brain fried and all of that. So I think that stuff is really important. I also like that Kate talks about in that book, she talks about cyclical living. And this has been something that really resonates for me. I wouldn't say I live it fully, but she just really talks about, for those who, women, and it doesn't have to be women, you can follow the moon cycle too, but just looking at cycles, whether you're looking at seasons or the moon or your menstrual cycle or whatever it is, just the reminder that unlike men, women are not on a 24-hour cyclical clock. We're on this sort of 28-day-ish cyclical thing, just like the moon, and that our energy at certain times is in different places due to our hormones. I'm sure so much being with autoimmune, like all of that. So anyway, that just resonated with me, because what it reminded me of is that there needs to be a season of rest. Like, I was someone who was always in what she would call like the ovulatory season, which is like visibility, out there, selling, doing, shining, whatever. And I was totally neglecting the sort of phases where I reflected and rested and paused. And that's been really helpful too. So Yeah, I think those are the big things. Like, it just, I don't know. Like, I got really into organic gardening over the last few years, and it just is like something about getting back to nature and watching a little seed turn into this big plant that like turns into all this food that then gives you like thousands of seeds from that one seed you planted to then plant as many, like thousands of new. It's just, there's something about it for me that is so profound and important, that I haven't necessarily taken, and maybe intentionally haven't taken and made it into my living, whatever, because, there's a history there. But that's been really helpful as well, is like getting back to nature. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I try very hard to make time for walks. I live in Rochester, New York now, so the winter it's a little difficult to do that. I basically live in Canada, but I'm actually north of certain sections of Canada.
Is it still cold right
now? No, it's finally, as of this week, it's gotten better, but it was yesterday, it was like 50, which I don't mind if I have like a light jacket on, but it's not the same as when it's like 65 and sunny. You can go walking. But I do really try to be outside because I notice just a drastic difference in my mood and my outlook. My husband's the same way. He'll go on long walks and he's like, I just notice a total difference in myself when I have that time. And I know certain countries, I don't want to misquote, but it's at least, I think maybe Japan and possibly one of the Scandinavian nations. I know part of their just general recommendations for depression and anxiety is forest bathing. So it's a medical term to spend time among trees and just take in nature. So I think that that's very valid. Very impressed by the gardening, by the way. My partner likes to garden. I'm still getting into it, but we're moving into a new house where we're going to have raised beds, and we have all these seedlings that are just like on every windowsill in our apartment right now, but it's still pretty cool to watch. I'm like, oh my God, they're everywhere. But it's pretty incredible. And I look forward to being able to go out into the backyard and just grab a strawberry or a cucumber or a tomato. And I think that slowing down is wonderful. And one thing that came up for me when you talked about the rest and the pause, I know as myself personally, naturally, honestly, I love school. I'm one of those nerds. If I could get paid to go to school and learn something forever, I would do it. And I just want to be a sponge. But where I struggle is you have to take in the knowledge, right? But then you need to let it sink in and apply it. And sometimes, especially as the perfectionist type A person, I just basically fill up my Audible and fill up my nightstand, and I'm just taking in, and not letting it absorb, not taking a moment to be like, does this resonate with me? Or is this something that, all the respect in the world to the author and whoever else is involved with this, but it's just not for me. So taking that time as you're learning and trying new things to really like let it sink in and to exercise a lot of patience and grace with yourself. I think the gardening hurdle for me is I'm going to be like, it didn't grow. Like I failed. And whereas my partner is a lot more patient with that stuff. So I think that's wonderful. I'm glad you shared that. It gives me a little more motivation to kind of try things I'm not aware of and things I'm not good at, and give myself that patience and that space. Something any other perfectionist can listen to. We tend to be a little cranky if we try something and we're not good at it. It makes it difficult to just kind of step way out of your comfort zone. Recently, I tried tennis. It's becoming fun. The first couple of lessons made me want to like throw a racket across. So yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that. I think anything that gets you closer to nature and where you're kind of, not to be hyperbolic, you're really witnessing like a miracle while you're watching all these things grow. And so I think that makes a lot of sense as far as going inward and taking the time for peace and quiet. If you don't mind, if you happen to know offhand, I assume there's other seasons. So she has the one where you're, or she shares about the one where you're really being seen and growing and rest. Is there anything else in those seasons that you found helpful?
There's 4. So I usually do it with my menstrual cycle, but if you don't have a menstrual cycle or that doesn't feel regular, you can do the moon cycles as well. So there's 4. There's the, so let me I have it right here. So there's the first quarter, the follicular energy. And this is all about preparation, initiation, planning, doing creatively challenging projects. So that's that first part. And then from there, you go into the ovulatory energy, which is all about kind of like, that's the one I mentioned, which is also the full moon energy, which is like opening up, collaborating, communicating, being visible. And then after that is luteal energy, which is let me see. Hold on, let me see. Oh yeah, which is all.
And I kind of put you on the spot there. Sorry.
My assistant actually puts it on my calendar, so I know, which is awesome. So the luteal is all about like getting work done, producing. It's like focused, get stuff done sort of energy. And then of course where is it? Let me just see, the menstrual energy, which is the last one, and which I kind of talked about, which is the rest, reflect, evaluate, and research energy. And right now, as we do this podcast, we're technically in that first quarter, if you're tracking the moon, which is this energy of like preparing, initiating, planning, doing creatively challenging things. And, I don't follow it by the book by any means, but sometimes it just gives me peace to look at it and understand, okay. And we took this into my annual planning for my Self-Care Society team this year too. It's like, how do we plan our quarters of the year more cyclically so that we don't forget to rest and we don't forget to reflect? Like you said, my coach, I remember working with her and she was like, if you don't stop to reflect, you're going to move forward and make the same mistakes over and over again because you never pause to say what worked, what didn't. And this is one of the things I do as part of Self-Care Society. I'm doing it this Sunday. So at the end of every month, I teach a monthly planning workshop, and we spend a portion of it kind of reflecting on the month that's wrapping up and life and like learning lessons and all that. And then we have some time to kind of plan and prepare and set intentions and organize the month ahead. And it's a really beautiful thing. I mean, I'm forced to do them because I teach them, but like they're so beneficial to be able to take the time to just pause and say, okay, this. And what I'll say is every single time, and you hear this from the community that takes the live session as well, is every single time they're like, wow, I did so much more than I realized, or wow, like when I first started writing, I feel like this month was like horrible, but this came out, and I think that we always find that through reflection and coming back to ourselves is like when we give ourselves the space, we actually make room for self-compassion. And I think that's like another piece of it is like, not even that we're not being self-compassionate, it's that we're not making time for it. And we have to slow down in order to do that. And I think that we're just in this culture that is like so fast paced, and the information that we're consuming is so unnatural. And so we just have to come back to that. It's like simple, spacious, secure, and I'll add slow, like that's it.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, I am so incredibly grateful that you made the time to be on the podcast today. I would like to ask if anyone is really enjoying your story, getting a lot out of it, where can they follow you? Yeah. And if they have any desire to work with you, how can they connect with you in that way?
Yeah, so I am on Instagram at Danika Brysha. It's just my name, at Danika Brysha. And then we also have our Self-Care Society Instagram. It's just at Self-Care Society. And then through those Instagram accounts, you can find links to my business and anything kind of that I put out there. I'm really, as I said, simplifying. I like to live practice what I'm preaching. So I don't really, I'm not doing a ton of like coaching or anything like that right now. But Self-Care Society is really an incredible resource and a powerful community. And, I teach a couple live classes a week there. So that's really where I'd say if you want to dig into this work a little bit more, that's the place for sure.
Well, thank you so much. For anyone listening, I really hope you enjoy a simple, spacious, and secure remainder of the day. I'm going to try my best to incorporate those thoughts today.
Amazing. Thanks, Paige.
I really hope you enjoyed this episode of Invisibly Unwell. If you like the show, I'd greatly appreciate if you followed it and if you left a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever it is that you're listening. This allows me to keep the show going and to continue to bring on incredible guests to share their stories.